The price tag on a bag of corn flour just went up. So did bread, rice, cooking oil. You probably blamed inflation, maybe the government, maybe the supermarket, but the real reason is a 21-mile stretch of water on the other side of the world. A waterway most people couldn't find on a map, and a white granular powder called urea that nobody talks about until everyone is paying for it. This is not a story about war. This is a story about fertilizer, and how the closing of one strait is quietly reshaping what the entire planet eats. To understand what is happening, you need to understand how modern farming actually works. Every plant on Earth needs nitrogen to grow. Nitrogen is in the air, but plants cannot absorb it directly from the air. They need it delivered through the soil in a form they can use. That delivery system is called synthetic fertilizer. The dominant form of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is urea, a white crystal, cheap to produce, easy to store, and essential to nearly every major crop on Earth. Corn needs it, wheat needs it, rice needs it. Without urea, global crop yields would fall by an estimated 40 to 50%. The planet could not feed itself. Now, how is urea made? It is made from ammonia, and ammonia is made from natural gas. Natural gas is burned at high pressure in the presence of hydrogen to synthesize ammonia, a process called the Haber-Bosch reaction. Fritz Haber developed it in Germany in 1909. Carl Bosch industrialized it. It is, by some estimates, the single invention most responsible for the existence of the current human population. Without the Haber-Bosch process, roughly half the people alive today would not have the food supply to sustain them, which means the supply chain for natural gas is also quietly the supply chain for human food. And the world's largest reserves of natural gas sit in one place, the Persian Gulf. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE. This region holds a disproportionate share of the world's gas fields, and built on top of them, some of the world's largest fertilizer plants. Qatar's QFCO, Saudi Arabia's SABIC, the UAE's Fertiglobe. Together, these Gulf producers account for roughly a third of all seaborne urea traded globally. And every ton of that fertilizer leaves the Gulf through the same exit, the Strait of Hormuz. February 28, 2026, United States and Israeli forces launch strikes on Iran. Within hours, the Strait of Hormuz closes. The world's attention goes to oil. Crude prices spike. Headlines scream about fuel costs and airline tickets. Nobody notices the fertilizer ships, but there are 21 of them, carrying nearly 1 million metric tons of urea and ammonia, sitting inside the Gulf with nowhere to go. Their cargo is not oil, it is not gold, it will not make the front page. But what is in those holds will eventually reach every grocery store on Earth. By March 1st, just 72 hours after the closure, global urea benchmarks have jumped from $480 to $600 per ton, a 25% increase in 3 days. By mid-March, urea is trading at $700 per metric ton, a level not seen since the post-Ukraine fertilizer shock of 2022. Oxford Economics raises its second quarter fertilizer price forecast by 20%. Ammonia has risen by 20%. And here's the thing that will not make sense to most people watching the news. This is only the beginning of the chain. The fertilizer price going up today is not the food price going up today. The food price going up is 6 to 12 months away, which means the worst of this is still ahead. The transmission works in 3 steps. Understand all 3 or you will underestimate what is coming. Step 1, the supply crunch. About 1/3 of all seaborne fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That is roughly 30% of globally traded urea and 20% of ammonia. Unlike oil, which can be diverted around the Cape of Good Hope via supertanker, the nitrogen fertilizer infrastructure in the Gulf is built specifically for vessel loading at coastal hubs. There is no pipeline equivalent. There is no strategic fertilizer reserve. G7 countries maintain strategic oil stockpiles. Not one maintains a strategic fertilizer reserve. So when the strait closes, the production does not stop, it just has nowhere to go. Major producers, QAFCO, SABIC, Fertiglobe, declare force majeure on their export contracts. The fertilizer that was supposed to arrive in Brazil in April will not arrive in April. The fertilizer that was supposed to arrive in India in March will not arrive in March. Step 2, the planting window. Here's the structural problem that most financial analysts are not pricing in. Fertilizer is not ordered the day before you plant a field. Farmers order in advance for specific seasons, miss the window, and the crop is not planted, or it is planted without adequate inputs. The Hormuz closure began on February 28, 2026. That is the beginning of the Northern Hemisphere spring planting season. American corn farmers in Arkansas and Kansas are placing their orders right now. Anhydrous ammonia, the most common nitrogen fertilizer used in U.S. corn production, is no longer available at the price they budgeted for. 1 ton of urea now costs U.S. farmers the equivalent of 126 bushels of corn, up from 75 bushels in December 2025. The math on corn has changed radically in 6 weeks. Some farmers will use less fertilizer and accept lower yields. Some will switch to soybeans, which fix their own nitrogen and need less urea. Some will simply not plant at all. Each of those decisions reduces the food supply 6 months from now. Step 3. The geography of exposure. Now watch which countries get hit hardest, and watch how surprising the list is. Brazil, the world's largest agricultural exporter. Soybeans, corn, coffee, sugar, the breadbasket that feeds much of Asia and Africa. Brazil imports 85% of its fertilizer demand, potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, from abroad. For nitrogen specifically, Brazil imports 97% of what it needs. The country that feeds the world cannot feed its own crops without buying fertilizer from someone else. A prolonged disruption during Brazil's key fertilizer import season does not just raise Brazilian food prices, it reduces Brazilian soybean output. And Brazilian soybeans feed chickens in China, cattle in Europe, and aquaculture operations across Southeast Asia. One shortage cascades into 3. India, the world's second largest urea producer, and still heavily dependent on Gulf gas to run its domestic production. With Gulf gas fields disrupted by conflict, India's own fertilizer plants are running below capacity. Indian basmati rice exports to Iran have halted entirely since the conflict began. India is being hit from both directions, higher input costs, and a closed export market. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, each relying heavily on Gulf nitrogen, each entering a planting season with constrained supply and elevated and the crisis extends beyond nitrogen. The Gulf produces 40 to 45% of globally traded sulfur, a key feedstock for phosphate fertilizer. Companies like Mosaic have reported a $250 million EBITDA hit in the first quarter of 2026 as sulfur costs more than doubled. It is not one nutrient crisis, it is 3 at once. By late March, the world is beginning to react. 54 American agricultural groups write a joint letter to President Trump calling for immediate market relief. The World Food Program issues a warning. Up to 45 million additional people could fall into life-threatening food insecurity if the strait remains closed through summer. The UN launches a task force to facilitate fertilizer shipments through the blockade. Iran agrees to a partial exemption, humanitarian and fertilizer cargo only. It is not enough. Meanwhile, the countries that can profit are moving fast. China restricts its own fertilizer exports to protect domestic supply. Russia tightens its export restrictions. North American producers celebrate CF industry. But here is the twist that reveals how structurally fragile the entire system is. The US itself imports about 18% of its nitrogen fertilizer. That 18% is exactly the surge volume that covers the spring planting peak. Even the world's largest natural gas producer cannot fully insulate its farmers from this shock. The system was optimized for efficiency, not resilience. And efficient systems, when they break, do not break slowly. Let's step back and name what this actually is. The world built a food system that depends on a single molecule, synthetic nitrogen. It concentrates. Now the question is, how much of this pain reaches you in the next 6 to 12 months? Wolf Research estimates the disruption could raise food at home inflation by roughly 2 percentage points in the US alone. The UN estimates global food prices could average 15 to 20% higher in the first half of 2026. In the UK, analysts already predict food prices will rise at least 9% by year end. The World Bank recorded urea prices surging 46% month on month between February and March 2026. The IFPRI reports Middle East the 2022 Ukraine war sent fertilizer prices to record highs and prompted dozens of policy papers warning about the vulnerability was documented. The timeline for fixing it was set at a generation away. And so here we are. 3 things worth understanding from this crisis before the food prices arrive and everyone starts asking why. First, the lag is not a buffer. It is a hidden accumulation of pressure. Fertilizer applied in April becomes the corn harvested in September, processed in October, and on supermarket shelves in November. The chain is long. Every link in the chain is absorbing the cost quietly right now before you see it. By the time you feel it, the cause is 6 months old and nobody is connecting the dots. Second, food security and energy security are the same problem, wearing different clothes. Energy is about 2/3 of the cost of producing synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. The same gas field that powers Qatar's air conditioning also produces the urea that grows corn in Brazil. A military conflict in one region is simultaneously a food supply crisis in another, connected by the same molecule, the same gas feedstock, the same strait. Governments that separate energy policy from food policy are managing 2 sides of the same problem with 2 bureaucracies that do not talk to each other. Third, efficiency and resilience are not the same thing, and we have been systematically choosing efficiency for 60 years. Just-in-time supply chains, single-source procurement, no strategic reserves for agricultural inputs. Every one of those decisions made the system cheaper and faster in normal conditions. Every one of those decisions made the system more brittle under stress. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, 21 miles of water between the world and a food supply crisis. Nobody designed it that way. The market just drifted there, one optimized decision at a time. The fertilizer crisis nobody is talking about is already in the field. It is in the decision a Kansas farmer made last week about whether to cut his nitrogen application by 30%. It is in the Brazilian soybean field that will be fertilized with less, or not at all, because the ship that was supposed to bring the urea is still sitting in the Gulf. It has not reached your cart yet, but it is on its way. And when it arrives, it will arrive without a label that says, caused by the Strait of Hormuz. It will just say, higher price. The most dangerous crises in the modern world are the ones with a